Hey everybody, Ricky Timms here. We are at AQS QuiltWeek in Paducah, and I am so excited that I was invited to have a retrospective of my exhibits, of my quilts here at the show. We call it Quilts That Speak because honestly, I feel that quilts do have a story to tell, and this particular exhibit is telling the story of my 27-year experience so far as a quilter. As a matter of fact, I've got my very first quilt here. I will tell you it's pathetic. You can come and look at it and you can laugh at it and you can say, oh my gosh, he doesn't have the points matching, and look at those hand stitches. They're like a 1/4 inch long. But I will tell you, if I hadn't made that quilt, I wouldn't be where I am. And while I'm not making fun of the quilt, I really do kind of get a laugh out of it because we all start somewhere, and I started with no teachers. I didn't have anything but a book showing me how to do it. So my first quilt is here, and then also I've got several of my prize-winning quilts that I've won over the years here as well. People are laughing and enjoying my self-portrait quilt, which I made a few years ago, and the biggest question asked about that one is, why do I have a green nose? And I don't really have a good answer. It's still a nose, it just happens to be green. The quilt behind me here is called Dad's Lone Star. It's a quilt that I actually made with my dad. My dad and I started quilting the same week. Neither of us knew the other was going to do that. My dad was going to do stained glass. He broke some glass and decided to try something else. My mom had a sewing machine, so he started making a quilt. The week I started quilting, I was going to make a shirt, and I went and looked at patterns for shirts, and I thought, no, I'm going to look stupid if I wear this shirt. And as I was leaving the store, I saw the book that made my first quilt. And so we actually started quilting the same week without even discussing that. But over the years, my dad loved to do traditional designs, and he really did love the Lone Star. So in the early 2000s, Dad put together all of the diamonds that you see in this quilt, and I did the setting in the applique, and it actually won a prize here at Paducah. In my first year of quilting, I eventually found a quilt guild, and I learned that there were rules and that 1/4 inch seams had to be 1/4 inch. But I took a class in November of 1991 from Nancy Halpern, and she was teaching us how to take blocks and shift them or reverse them and create some really unique quilts. This quilt is called The Way Home, and it's essentially made from one block, and it's a block that I did in that class. It's a log cabin block, but it's done in a Greek key kind of spiral. And on two sides of that block, you've got half square triangles on two sides. I took that block and shifted and turned it, but here's the thing that's interesting about this quilt. It's one fabric. Now, excluding the black and the border, it's one fabric. It was a misdyed second. I paid 88 cents a yard for all they had, and I bought 2.5 yards, and I fussy cut that entire fabric up to make this quilt. As a matter of fact, it was at the beginning of the dye process where they were just rolling out the colors and getting them, so there's even places where the dye dripped on the fabric, and I fussy cut that. It looks like cigarette burns or something in the quilt, but it's really where the dyes, there were two spots, and I fussy cut them so they both ended up in the quilt. Now, a log cabin quilt tends to have a center that's the hearth, the center of the home. It's often red. I didn't have any red, but this quilt is about the journey of life. It's called The Way Home. And on this journey, we're finding these little paths, and we stop at the night at a fire, a place of security. And then we continue the journey, and we stop somewhere else at night for security, and we light a fire and we stay warm. And that's what this is about. Now we know it's nighttime because I have a moon up in the upper right corner. It's a block on point, and then all the stars are in the night sky. The quilt is an allegory about life. And if you look at the hand quilting that I did on this, it's all spiraling and coming right here. This is a house, the way the blocks came together. And I put a little window in there. The window is not lit up, which means I'm not home. So in the journey of life, we're looking for that ultimate place of security, but ultimately I haven't arrived yet. And this goes all the way back to November of 1991, and I was a baby quilter. I'd been quilting for about 6 months. I'm standing in front of Bohemian Rhapsody now. It was a quilt that kind of was an unexpected quilt. Up until this quilt, I had decided that applique was not my thing and I would stick with patchwork, but I also realized I was minimizing my design options, so I had to find a way to do applique. I started practicing on applique by creating just a center medallion, and this is the medallion, and I tried it with a zigzag, I tried it with a satin stitch. I ended up discovering the double blanket stitch, and I love the double blanket stitch. So I thought, well, I could make a small quilt just this big. And the quilt said, no, make me bigger. So I designed it and I made it this big, and it kept saying, no, make me bigger. So I kept designing and I added the rest of it. I tried to listen to the voice of the quilt, and I guess I'm glad I did, because it did win a first prize here in Paducah. And it spawned a style of quilt, or genre of quilt, called Rhapsody Quilts. And many of you have either seen them or heard about them. Well, this was the one that started that whole train rolling down the track. And it's been fun to see. It's like an old friend now, because it's a good 16 years old. But if you'd love to come see this one, it's on display as well. I hope that if you do come to Quilt Week, even if these quilts aren't here, you've got plenty of quilts to be inspired by. So don't miss the opportunity to come to Paducah and see all the quilts. Thanks, everyone.